Today we have an extra special guest to visit with us. We have with us Jim Criswell from the Entomology Department at Oklahoma State University. He's here to give us some tips on how to interpret all that information that you see on the pesticide labels when you buy a bottle or a bag at the store. Jim, what have you got for us today?
Well, we have a tremendous amount of information on the pesticide labels, and the first thing we should start with is the trade names. Now, trade names are basically what the companies call their products, just like in cars, whether it's a Tiempo or a Grand Prix or whatever. Now, we have two trade names here that are both fungicides. However, as you'll notice that these have different trade names, or the names that the company calls them. We'll also show another set of labels which have different trade names, but they're both identified as orchard or fruit sprays. That's the first place you should start when you start looking at a label, is to get an idea of what the spray might be.
So you can have a trade name that looks different but be the same thing, or sounds the same but actually be different products.
That is correct. That is correct. And that's why you start with a trade name, and then we move on down to things such as chemical name will always be on the label. And we have an example of a chemical name here, and that's that long name that most of us never know what it is because we are not chemists. But the other item that's on a label is often the common name will be on the label. And we have here an example of Benomil, which is a common name for the fungicide benlate. And the common name often gives us a clue to what is in that product. In other words, if the trade name just says an orchard spray and we find a common name that says Benomil or something like that, we know it's a fungicide with the product benlate in it, or Benomil in it.
Do all labels have this common name on them?
No, many of them do not. The common name is not required, so it's up to the company if they want to put the common name on them. And the other item that we then move next to is the active ingredient. And as we can see on these labels, this is where the common name or chemical names are listed. And it's the active ingredient that is actually doing the control work that we are intending the pesticide to do.
So if you want to find out if two products are the same, you need to look at that active ingredient part to match up those, not the trade name.
That's true. That's very true. And the example we have for the active ingredients is a fruit spray which says Orchard Home Spray. Now, when we move over to the active ingredient area on the label, it says Captan at 14.2%, related derivatives, which are products that are related to Captan, 0.8%, and then malathion, which is 7.5%, and methoxychlorotechnical, which is 15%.
It also lists inert ingredients. What's the difference between an active ingredient and an inert ingredient?
Okay, the active ingredient is the material that is actively controlling the pest, or is actually controlling the pest. The inert ingredients are usually such things as carriers or other materials that must be in the formulation for the pesticide to be applied. The inert ingredients do not control the pest, is the bottom line. So those items will always, the active and inert will always be on the label. And the active will be what the pesticide we are looking for. And often it is in the chemical name form rather than the common name form.
So also under the active ingredient, it lists the percentage. And that could come into importance if you're buying two types of Benomil spray. One may be cheaper, but it's only got half as much Benomil in it or something.
Correct.
Check that too.
Correct, because that will then go back to the rate, how much you will apply. And that's why you always need to read the label to be sure what you have and follow the directions. Okay, the other items that we need to look at is the type of pesticide will always be on that label somewhere. In other words, is it a fungicide, a herbicide, or an insecticide? Now, sometimes it's spelled out real clear, such as the example we have here. It says it's a fungicide right there on the trade name. Now, this other example, you look at the trade name, and you don't know whether it's an insecticide or a fungicide, and you don't think it'll be a herbicide because it's a fruit spray. But where the type will be listed is on what we call the side panel or other information, and you have to read this side panel to see what kind of type of pesticide it is. And in this example, it says it's an insecticide.
That's important because an insecticide won't do you any good for disease control, and a fungicide won't do anything for insect control.
That's exactly right. That's very true. So you need to make sure that you're buying the right pesticide for the pest you're wanting to control. Now, the other item that is extremely important is the signal word that is on a pesticide label. All pesticide labels will have signal words on them. And what we're talking about here is the word caution, which is on the least toxic and, if you will, hazardous materials. Those two words are not synonymous, but we'll use them that way. And the other word is warning. And we have an example of both of these. And the warning is more toxic than the caution pesticide.
So you need to take more precautions when you're handling, storing, and applying it.
Correct. That's very correct. And then the third category is the danger signal word. And the danger will be on your most toxic materials, and those pesticides should not be used by homeowners because of the toxicity.
Those are mostly commercial growers type sprays.
Correct, correct. That's true. Now, when you get down to, there are some other items which seem quite small, but they're very important if you have a problem and you start contacting regulatory people or people for information about specific items on a pesticide label. And that would be the EPA registration number. And the EPA registration number is like a fingerprint, Jim. It identifies the company and that particular product's label.
Is that on every single label?
It's on every single label. And it'll be as we see here, we have some examples of 3 different EPA registration numbers on 3 different products. Now, why that becomes important, the examples that we're using happen to be ORTHO Fire Ant killers or materials.
All with different numbers?
They're all with different numbers, and they're all for fire ant control. However, there are 3 different products. In other words, one has ORTHENE in it, another one has diazinon, and a third one has dursban.
So it wouldn't do any good for me to call up and say, I've had a problem with ORTHO Fire Ant killer, because they wouldn't know exactly what it is. It could be any of these 3. And you'd have to treat them each differently.
That's exactly right, because the labels might not read the same, the precautions probably would not read the same, and even the treatment methods might read differently. So that's why the EPA registration number becomes important. Okay, now the other item that we need to get to is the precautions on the label. There will always be precautions on a pesticide label, and what we're talking about here is the safety information to humans and to the environment. And I'd like to read one from a pesticide label that gives the human caution, if you will. And what it says as we read along is, caution, may irritate eyes, nose, throat, and skin, avoid breathing dust, avoid contact with skin, eyes, and clothing. Wash thoroughly after using. Keep away from fire and sparks. In case of contact with skin, flush skin or eyes with plenty of water. Now, what they're saying here is that you do not want this material in your eyes, you do not want it on your skin, you do not want to breathe it. And so there has to be some interpretation as far as...
It doesn't say what to do in order to avoid it, it just says you need to avoid it.
Correct. And so you get to protective equipment. And what is required would be some type of eye protection, such as goggles, a respirator for the nose, you don't want to breathe the stuff, and then skin protection. That means gloves, if you're applying it, gloves, long sleeve shirt, long leg pants, you don't want it on your skin. So a lot of times you have to interpret what kind of protection you need to take when applying pesticides.
So the only cautions are going to be for just the applicator or are there other types of cautions you'll find?
There are other types of cautions. There'll always be some type of environmental caution. And our next example has to do with an insecticide, and its environmental caution says, this product is toxic to fish and wildlife. Birds feeding on treated areas may be killed. Keep out of lakes, streams, or ponds. Do not apply when weather conditions favor drift from treated areas. Do not contaminate water by cleaning equipment and disposal waste. This product is highly toxic to bees. So what they are saying here is if you have a goldfish pond or any type of water, you do not want to get the material in that water because it is toxic to aquatic creatures such as fish and probably other crustaceans. It is toxic to birds. So if you're making a treatment to let's say a turf area or whatever, you don't want to do it if you have a lot of bird activity on the yard.
Now I noticed this label, it has a warning statement rather than a caution statement. So we're getting into more restrictions and more directions on use because it is a more dangerous or more toxic material.
That's correct. That's correct. Now some caution products, such as ORTHENE, will have a very strong warning label to keep out of water because ORTHENE is very toxic to fish.
Even though it has a very low toxicity to people.
Correct.
Very high toxicity to fish.
Correct. Okay. Now, the other item that will be on pesticide labels is the disposal recommendations. Now, these disposal recommendations can either be specific or very vague. Now, we have an example of one that is vague, which personally I don't like, but it's on there, and as we can read it, it says, dispose of waste pesticides in containers in a safe place. Never reuse the pesticide container. Well, Jim, what does that say? It tells us nothing. Now, a much better disposal statement is one such as this one, which says, partially filled bottle may be disposed of by securely wrapping the original container in several layers of newspaper or discarded in the trash. The container do not reuse empty bottles. So
it's a lot better. Not only does it say be careful, it tells you exactly what to do. The other one, you don't really know what to do.
That's correct. This one tells you exactly what to do. And as one can see by skimming over the information we had, there is a tremendous amount of information on the label before you ever get to what site, pest, or rates that you might be purchasing the material for.
And there's a lot of important information in there too that really should be read before used.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, Jim, for coming with us and showing us how to read pesticide labels.